we on?
Good. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a very nice afternoon. I'm very happy to see you here at Melting Pot. Let me welcome here on stage a wonderful musician and producer and multi-instrumentalist John Parish. We will definitely talk not about PJ Harvey, but also about his solo work. And also let me invite you for his show tonight at 10 o'clock at Full Moon Stage. Definitely don't miss it. I'm a little bit sorry for my voice. I've been struggling with some cold or flu or whatever, so sorry for it. I will try to speak my best. So maybe welcome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the time.
Pleasure.
Can we start with your artistic roots, actually? How music get into your life? If you had any music heroes or even some albums that actually influence your work?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I grew up listening to music because my whole family did music. Not really rock. My dad was into opera, and so that was the kind of music, the first music that I heard. But it didn't really. I didn't really relate to it. I kind of started relating to music when I heard T-Rex. That was my first big introduction to pop music, and I just found something really exciting about that. And I actually still really love that first record that I knew, the T-Rex Electric Warrior album. I still think it's one of the best ever rock and roll records, and I use it as a benchmark for sound when I'm producing still to this day. So.
I also read that you really love David Bowie and Led Zeppelin, and you used to listen to it quite a lot.
Yeah. I mean, the first show I ever saw was David Bowie in Bristol. I guess I was 13 or 14, and I'd never even seen a local band, actually. I hadn't seen anybody play at all live, so it was really the first thing I ever saw. And it was when he was touring the Aladdin Sane album, so it was the last tour with the Spiders from Mars. So it was a pretty intense introduction to live music. And I mean, I was already playing drums by that time, but I didn't really know. It's funny, because everyone sees everything all the time now, so you know how things are done. At that time, you'd listen to stuff on the radio, but you'd have no idea how a record was made. So I was playing drums, but I didn't even know how to play a proper beat because I'd never seen anyone play a beat. So when I saw the David Bowie show, I was watching Woody Woodman see the drummer, and it's like, oh, okay, you hit the cymbals like that, and then the snare drum like that, and that's how you construct a beat. That was really my introduction to how you play music. It seems unbelievably naive now, but that's kind of how it was growing up in a small town in the early 1970s.
So you chose drums as a first instrument, or something else? Drums.
I started with piano, but that was because that's what my parents sent me to learn. Hello, I'm back. Sorry, I didn't really like it that much. And then I had a go at trombone, which I enjoyed, but I was pretty rubbish at, and then and then drums, and that was the one that clicked for me. I thought, oh yeah, this seems good. I could be in a band with drums, I couldn't quite see how I could be in a band with trombone,
So did you go to any lessons, or you had some teachers, or on yourself?
I had a couple of lessons, but like I said, I couldn't play a beat because the lessons. Again, things have changed a lot. In those days, you didn't really have lessons in rock music or even jazz. Any music lessons were classical. That was it. So the drum lessons I had were how to do a press roll and how to play timps and that kind of thing. Or like xylophone, and which was cool, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to play a drum kit. So I learned that from listening to records and going to shows and watching drums.
And how about your beginnings with bands and playing in bands?
Kind of the same as everybody, really. Me and a bunch of friends from school. We formed a band. None of us could play anything really. We were absolutely terrible. But we booked a show, and we learned we couldn't even really properly play chords. You know, I couldn't really play a beat. The guitar players couldn't play chords. But we did our first show, and you know, everybody from school came along and saw it, and it was great. We were terrible, but it was great fun, and you know, that was the beginning from then. And then you just get better the more you do, of course.
Do you remember your first show on stage?
I do, yeah. It was somebody had written a theatre piece, and they wanted some live music, so they hired our band, which was this school band, and we were terrible, as you would expect. And I remember we got a review in the local paper, and it talked about the play, and the headline was, "Peace was declared and music murdered." And I thought, okay. At the time I was really upset, but later on I quite appreciated that.
You are very well known for your collaboration with PJ Harvey, and you've been working together for more than 30 years, actually. There is quite a nice story about how you two met, so maybe you can tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I had a band called Automatic Lemeni, and sorry, it's an unpronounceable name, whatever language, and we used to do a lot of shows around the Oval, this little town in the southwest of England where I was from and where Polly was from as well. And Polly started coming along to the shows, and she was, a teenager, 16, 17, and she just started giving me cassettes of her songs at the end of the gigs, and like people do, they still come and give CDs or whatever, or link now, but then it was cassettes, and when I heard them, I thought, wow, that kid's got a really great voice. The songs were like just, simple folk songs at that time. She was really young, just starting off, but her voice was already great, right from then. And so I thought, I'm going to ask her to be in the band. And so when she left school, she joined the band, and we played together for 2 or 3 years, in that lineup. And then gradually she was writing more and more songs, and I was being distracted by other projects, and she said, I'm going to form my own band, and there it was. Like six months later, she was signed and had an album out, and it was fantastic.
When did you start to produce albums, yours or your colleagues, actually?
I got into production by accident, really, which is probably, you could say that about my whole career. It's not like I had an idea I was going to do this, then that, then this, and it followed on logically. It was, I had my own band. I was trying to make my own recordings, and in studios I would sort of direct. I mean, I didn't even really think of it as producing. I didn't really know what producing was. It's actually quite a difficult thing to define. People often ask me, what is production? And say, well, it's not. It's kind of decision-making, really. And sometimes it involves a lot of hands-on work. It can be anything from, helping with the arrangement of the song, making suggestions for changes to the lyrics. I often play quite a lot of instruments on records I produce, so it could be quite full on, but at the same time it can be just sitting at the back listening to what people are doing and saying, yeah, sounds good, that's it. You don't need anything else, that can be it. But I got into production because there was another band from the same town as me called the Chesterfields. And this was in kind of the mid-1980s when it was really, well, that kind of jingly-jangly guitar music. And they really fitted that that sound, and they got a deal to make a record, but they'd never been in a studio. And they knew I had. We weren't really friends, but they knew we knew who each other were because it was a small town. And so they just asked me if I would help them in the studio. So I kind of went in and helped to tune the guitars, helped to keep the drummer in time, and the record came out with my name on the back as producer, and it was like a hit in the independent charts. And so other bands kind of sort of bought it, oh, produced by John Parish, okay, maybe we'll ask him to produce us. So it just kind of snowballed, really. So it was a total accident, probably like a lot of people. I think that, you know, maybe if you go the technical route and you start off as a studio engineer, then maybe you've already got an idea you want to work towards being a producer, so you're going through that technical route. But I think a lot of musicians end up as producers by default, really, because somebody has to make the decision when you're in the studio, and usually there'll be somebody within a band that is interested in that kind of thing, interested in taking those decisions, is interested in the sound of the record and how the recording's been put together.
There was a conference, music conference, maybe 3 days ago called Czech Music Crossroads, and there were also some other producers like Lucy Duran and Simon Emerson. And Simon said that for him the production is about taking control because he wasn't always happy about the work of other producers, and he's a musician too. So what is production for you, actually? Is it also about taking control?
That's a good question, because if it's your own record, then it's good to be in control of it to a degree. And if you're an outside producer, if you're producing somebody else's record, to what extent are you controlling the artistic decisions of another artist? I think that's a difficult question that you have to think about when you're producing. But the way I look at it is, when you're working on your own stuff, and I know this from making my own records, it's obviously going to be harder to make an objective decision on anything, on how something sounds, particularly if you're singing something. You know, it's very difficult to judge your own voice. So you really need a really good objective opinion on that. That's really what a producer is for me. So it's not, I understand the element of control, but for me it's not so much about that. It's about bringing a degree of objectivity to the process, which is very difficult to do for yourself.
I'm pretty sure you have to be also a very good psychologist, and sometimes you have to, probably very often, to criticize the work of your friends, your colleague. How hard is that for you?
That depends on who it is. Yeah, that is difficult. That was something that I definitely got better at the more producing I did. At first I often found it quite frustrating producing, because especially when I started off, I was often working with musicians who maybe had some good ideas, but maybe they technically weren't that great, and so it was quite frustrating trying to just get a decent take of a song, that, you know, trying to get them to play the song without making a big mistake. That was almost the first hurdle. I mean, again, it's a little bit easier now because so many things are recorded on computer, and you can fix things in a way that you couldn't fix things when I started off. That's a whole nother issue. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, you know, of course. But the psychology of getting somebody to play well is really fascinating, because obviously some people kind of need a bit of a kick. Some people, you've got to be really careful. You have to go around the houses to explain something to people. Some people sometimes you have to make people think that it was their idea to do something, which is another sort of psychological dance. And sometimes you just have to be totally honest, and that's the best way of doing it. But that's hard to do. it's hard to do the first time you work with someone. You have to build a relationship of trust between the producer and the artist. That's absolutely vital. So I would say, along with bringing a degree of objectivity to the process, the other absolutely vital part of producing is trust between the artist and the producer, because you have to be able to tell someone that wasn't good, that performance wasn't good, without them thinking that they're not good. So, you know, which is very, you know what that's like, when if somebody, you know, says something about, you know, I cooked a dinner and, you know, it didn't taste very good, you take it as a personal insult. It's very hard not to be offended by things. But if you've got a really strong level of trust, which generally is only built up over time, then it's possible to be quite direct and be able to move through things quickly without it's not even that I'm too concerned with hurting people's feelings. Sometimes that's okay, you know, you get over that. But it's about, what you don't want to do is damage an artist's confidence when you're in the studio, because then you're not going to get a good performance from them. So it is finding the way around of those situations.
How do you prepare for the recording itself? Because you've been working on albums of really variety artists like Rokia Traore or Neve and the Dear Children, who are also artists from different cultures and different countries. So I suppose it's not so easy, or maybe the input is a bit different. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's something I feel really lucky to have been able to do, actually, is to work with artists from all over the world. Obviously, an English-speaking artist is relatively straightforward for me. But I've worked with a lot of artists whose certainly English isn't their first language. Maybe they don't even speak much English at all, and that's quite a challenge. But I think I thought that it was going to be more difficult than it was, because I mean, I know it sounds like some kind of naff cliche to say music is an international language, but there is a way you can understand people and understand what people mean through when somebody's playing something. It's very easy just to make them understand how you'd like to hear something, even if you can't necessarily use the right words. For me, it was also about, it was good to learn, like, say, working with Rokia Traore, for instance, the singer from Mali. And, you know, her band was part, like, I don't know, half or two-thirds Malian, you know, African musicians, and one-third European musicians. And they all had a different way of playing. And so you have to find a different way. You have to find a different way of recording things. So, for instance, there would be no overdubs. You know, things really had to be played as a live thing. But you're working with a lot of instruments that are quite cranky. You know, like a little, you know, things that are gourds, hollowed out gourd with an animal skin and one piece of string. You know, and then a drum kit, and a stand-up bass, and then 3 backing singers, and it's finding a way of recording all that simultaneously, and making it sound good to me and making it sound good to Rokia as well, and understanding what she wanted. But it's I do think it's a real privilege to be able to work with artists like that, and I've learned, you know, tremendous amount from it.
So before working with her, actually, did you go through some I don't know sources of African music, or you just sit down with her and you were talking about the ideas?
When I'm producing something, and this again is something that's changed over the years as I've got more experienced and just more used to working with different artists. I used to do a lot of pre-production and a lot of thinking about how things should sound in advance of going into the studio. And for anybody that's thinking of going into production, I'm not going to say that it's a bad idea to do that, because you have to do whatever you want to do. But for me, I found it was almost better. The records I liked best were the ones where I hadn't done any pre-production or much research beforehand. It was more about responding to the situation as it arises. I know partly that's because also the more records I've done and the kind of I've tended to work with like a lot of really great musicians, and so you don't need to do much beforehand. It's about capturing a moment. Almost you can do, if you think about it too hard before you start, you tend to put down little markers that you then try and meet. And so sometimes I would find myself thinking that because I thought in advance this song needed to be, a particular song needed to sound a particular way, so if it wasn't sounding that way, I'd be doing things to try and steer it. And I realized that the records I enjoyed most that I'd made were the ones where I hadn't steered it, I hadn't really thought too much about it, and things had kind of gone in their own direction. And really that's about being really confident, to trust your instincts. And some artists, it's again going back to that trust between the artist and the producer. If the artist trusts the producer, then they'll do that. If they don't trust you, then they're going to be very nervous about changing something. Maybe they've been rehearsing this song for 6 months. They wrote it, they made a demo, they've rehearsed it with their musicians, really happy with the sound, they think it sounds really cool. Then you come in and say, why don't we take that verse out and change, and maybe play the thing a little bit faster and skip that bit, and that bit's really good, so why don't we double that? They're going to freak out if they don't trust you. But some people, once you've worked with them for a while and you've built up a level of trust, and you've done things like that, and it's worked, and they're really happy, then they'll be, yeah, let's do it. That could be really exciting. But it's not something that you can do easily on your first couple of records or the first time you work with a producer. Sure.
You are extremely busy. You've been working on quite a lot of recordings. So how do you choose the artist you want to work with? Do you get offers, or you more like look who would you like to work with?
I get offers. I think that really is the way to do it, because for me the artist has to want to work with the producer. If I wanted to work with somebody else and they either didn't know my work or weren't that interested in it, I think it would be a very difficult thing to do. It'd be very difficult to build that trust. It'd be very difficult, and quite reasonably so. Why would they listen to my opinion? I think the artist has to come to me in order for it to be a good collaboration. And once or twice, it maybe wasn't the artist that wanted me to work with him. Maybe it was the manager or a record company or something like that. And in those instances, those are the records that have been problematic, that have been difficult, and nobody's really happy with it at the end. And it's really only happened once or twice, because I learned pretty early on to trust my instincts. If something, an artist will approach me, and maybe it's just an email or something, and you can almost tell from the tone of the email whether you feel you're going to have some kind of, be able to have a dialogue with them. And certainly after a phone call, you can tell. And if it feels wrong on any level, then I just say no. Make a polite excuse for not doing it, because it has to feel right,
Very often it happens that the record is much better than the live performance of the band. Do you think about this? How will be the end of it? Because I get, me as a journalist, I get so many records from the bands who are absolutely perfect in many ways, but then life is really lame. So are you trying to find a balance also between this?
That's an interesting question, and I've never been asked that before. I like that. Do you try and, yeah, because you're basically asking almost, are you trying to make something that's not actually there? Are you trying to create something that's better than it should be? I mean, I think of records and live performances as two different things, so I don't mind them being different. That maybe that's almost touching on the discussion about whether modern recording techniques are antithetical to making good records, because you can make things too perfect. You can certainly make an average performance sound technically flawless. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. So obviously, then you go out to the live. Maybe you see the band and they don't perform the song in the same way that you heard it on the record, or to anywhere near the same technical degree. But also, like a lot of concerts you see nowadays, actually, there's an awful lot of music on playback anyway. So in a way, what you can do in the studio, you can also do live, should you choose to, if you have the budget to do it. It's not my preferred way of doing things. I'd rather see people play. I don't really, if I go to see a concert, I like to see people play the music live. I don't really want to hear, I don't care if it's missing the second guitar that was on the record, or the tambourine, or the extra backing vocals, But I like people to be able to play well. But I think that there's no. You have to, when you're making a record, you have to make it sound as good as you can. You have to make the performances sound as good as you can. I don't spend a lot of time fixing things or tuning things that are out of tune, because I like to hear imperfections. I like to hear mistakes, because they can be really exciting. Sometimes mistakes are the best bit of a record, and it's really good not to fix all that stuff. And I hate the fact with modern recording techniques, it is possible to fix things, and it's always tempting. But I don't think you can say, if somebody comes in and they can't play that well, I don't think you could say, well, I'm not going to make you sound any good because you're not going to sound any good live. You try and make as good a record as possible, and then hope that they put the work in so they do sound good.
Sure. As we mentioned, PJ Harvey, you've been working together for a really long time. Does she still surprise you?
Yeah, she does, after all this time, which is great. You would think that was almost not possible, but she does, and it's been obviously fantastic to have such a long working relationship with an artist, and for that artist to be so great and so creative, and obviously over that length of time, it's more like a family really, rather than a producer-artist relationship. So we can be very direct with each other, which means things move very quickly, and we can be quite critical of each other as well, which I think is also good if you can do that and not be offended, because again, we know that when we've got something that we both like, we know that we're confident that it's going to be really good, because if there's anything that either of us feel if we're even sort of a little bit doubtful of something, then it doesn't make it through to the record or to the live show, whatever we happen to be working on. So that's great. But going back to your question, Polly, because she's very some artists work by producing an awful lot of work constantly. And that's how they make, like another writer that I work with a lot, How Gelb from the band Giant Sand, is one of those artists that just is constantly producing stuff all the time. And there's no filter over what he does, so everything comes out. And then it's up to the producer or whoever he's working with to try and find some kind of reason within the mayhem. Whereas Polly is the opposite. She takes a long time between records, a long time between pieces of work. She thinks about it very, very deeply. And you know, obviously I'm privy to that process, so I'll see rough drafts of lyrics, I'll hear early demos of songs right the way through, but I'm always surprised. Every record that she does, there'll be something that I wasn't expecting, either lyrically or musically or performance-wise. You know, for instance, the last tour that we did, the Hope 6 tour with a big band, and you know, she's very, she sees the whole picture. She doesn't, which I think is quite rare in an artist. There aren't very many people I've worked with who think about every single thing from the ground up. So it's not just about the lyrics and the music and the sound, it's really the lights, the stage setting, absolutely everything. She has an idea on, and that's great.
You also produced the album of hers, Let England Shake, and England is quite shaking now in the sense of political. How do you feel about it?
Jesus Christ.
Nice answer.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What can you say? I mean, it's obviously I don't feel good about it. Personally, I feel terrible about it because I work constantly with musicians from all over the world, and anything that makes that more difficult is going to be a problem for me. So personally, I don't like it. I don't like anything about it. Beyond that, obviously, I don't like it because I don't like the subtext behind. I don't like the nationalist subtext behind Brexit, or behind any. You know, it's not just Brexit. This is nationalist movements going on all across Europe and America, as we know. But Brexit is obviously it's. I think that the UK has been a little bit complacent for a very long time, that we weren't, there'd never been a successful fascist party in the UK. There'd never been a successful extreme right party. They were always seen as total cranks, and nobody could imagine that was going to happen. And you know, we're not a fascist state yet by any means, but there is an element to Brexit that has that and is using that, and there are people who are calling for a hard Brexit who definitely have views that I would find pretty reprehensible. And what is the most frustrating thing to see is that obviously I think it's a mistake, but I think that probably the political establishment in the UK never imagined that it was going to happen. I think that David Cameron was a weak and careless leader, but I don't think that he intended there to be a referendum on Brexit, because it's not something that you can realistically have a referendum on, because most people don't know what the European Union is, what our relationship to it is. So they're voting on the most peculiar of issues, or on a feeling, you know, which is fine to have a feeling about things, but it's a massively complex thing that nobody really understands. And so it felt like we had a vote where people were not tricked into voting for something that they don't understand, but just I feel a lot of people were voting for something that kind of voting for an imaginary, either nostalgically. So you had some old people think, oh, I remember when we weren't part of the European Union and it was fantastic. Of course, it probably wasn't, but you remember your childhood. It's pretty fantastic, so it's great. So you've got that. You've got other people going on this take back control kind of thing. But and obviously, if you ask somebody, what is it that you feel you've lost control of that you'd like to have control of again? Nobody will really know, or maybe they'll say something like, "Oh, I'd really rather buy my bananas in pounds than in kilos." And you think, okay, well, fair enough. That's an answer, but it's not. It's not a big issue. But it seems like it's almost an unstoppable train now, and it's quite hard to see. It's quite hard for me to see a way out, and so I think it's frustrating and depressing, and I'm not quite sure where it's headed.
So back to the less depressing theme. You mentioned giant sand. Somewhere I read that when it comes to friendship, it's perfect, but when it gets to the working with them, a collaboration, it's really hard. So maybe can you a bit evaluate?
Yeah, well, with I mean, I met Hau Gelb from Giant Sand, I don't know, 20 years ago or something, and we became friends. And so we were friends before we worked together. Working with Hau was an experience, because that was the first time. That up to that time, I had always done pre-production, and I sort of did it with the Giant Sand. I thought, okay, we got 3 weeks to record an album, so we need to do a song every couple of days. I had a sort of a plan in my head. So the first day, we start off in the studio. We're due to start at 12, so like I'm there at 12, and then Hau's not there, but John and Joey from the Calexico guys who are playing tonight, and they're probably now actually, they showed up. They're fine, so they're set up, so okay, fine. So we're still waiting. Then about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Hau arrives. He's got one of his kids with him, and a dog, and sort of sits down, plays a couple of things on the piano, and then fiddles about a bit on the guitar. And he did that for about 45 minutes, and then he got up and said, "Did you get that? I'm off, I'll see you tomorrow." And I was like, oh, okay, so that was our first day of recording. Right, okay, so I can't do it in the way I would normally do it. So me and the engineer then spent the rest of the day putting microphones in every place in the studio, wherever, the kitchen, the bathroom, wherever, because I figured, okay, I need to record everything, because Hau could play something at any time, and he wants, and he was testing me, of course. It's like, you think you know how to produce a record, you don't know how to produce me, so you have to get everything, and it was a really exciting record, a bit of a roller coaster, but it was a great album, and it made me realize that it was a really good lesson in there's not one way to make a record. You have to be prepared for anything. You have to work quickly, and you have to be adaptable. And that was a really good learning thing. And it's always frustrating working with Hau, because he can't leave something alone. So if I've mixed a record for him, which I frequently do, if I give it back to him before it gets mastered, I know that by the time it's gone to the mastering studio, he'll have done something else to it. Probably, in my opinion, probably a mistake. But he can't, he's just one of those people, he has to do something all the time. He's like a shark, he's got to keep moving forwards.
Somewhere I read that you were also a lecturer in the performing arts. You were working with students. Is it true? And how was it for you to working with young musicians, students?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I started. Before I started making enough money to live on from producing and writing music, I taught at a performing arts college, and it was a really nice experience. I really liked working with students. It was great. For me, you learn from whoever you're working with. It doesn't matter if they're the greatest musician in the world or if they've literally picked up a guitar 10 minutes ago. In fact, sometimes it's better when they've literally picked up a guitar 10 minutes ago, because they'll do something that you would never imagine doing once you've played. And for me, working on this performing arts course, what was a great challenge was I had to work with really strange groups of musicians. So it would be maybe 7 guitars, a drummer, 2 flutes, and a bassoon or something like that. And I'd have to make a piece of music for that lineup, and I'd have to do it in 2 hours. So we'd have to figure something out, and that was. And some of the players would be great, and some of them would be total beginners. So I had to also make arrangements, a piece of music that was arranged, and within that arrangement, there were quite sophisticated lines and very, very simple lines that had to work together. And for me, that really, I think that still infected the way that I make music now, the way I write music now. I really like that combination of simplicity and complexity. I love the way that they rub against each other, and you can get something really beautiful sometimes from the simplest building blocks.
You've done quite a lot of work also for movies and TV series. Are you now in the process to compose some more music, and can you tell us something more about your work in this field?
Sure. Yeah, I am actually. I've just literally started work on a new film score for a film called Tench that's directed by Patrice Toy, the Belgian director. And she was actually the first director that asked me to score a movie. And that was a really, again, it was an accident, me getting into film music, but I was very, very happy to embrace that accident. It was, in fact, it happened when I was in Tucson. I was working on the giant sound record that I was just talking about, and I got back to the hotel one evening, and there was this was in the days of fax. There was a fax waiting for me from Patrice. It was just said simply, "Hi, I'm a Belgian film director. I'm making a film called Rosie. Really like you to write the music. Are you interested?" And so I was like, okay, well, yes, but how did this come about? And it turns out that she'd really liked the first instrumental piece on the first collaborative album that me and Polly did, Dance Hall at Last Point. It was a song called Girl, just a little simple instrumental, and Patrice had been using it as the temp music on the film. Well, I didn't even know what temp music was at that time. I didn't know anything about film music. But what I had done, and this was totally coincidentally, was just before Patrice approached me, I'd spent about 3 months writing a series of instrumental pieces, and I didn't really know what to do with them. They were just kind of ideas that were popping into my head, and so I kind of had like a little bank of like a number of pieces in the bank, and so Patrice came to Bristol and to talk to me about the film, and so I said, "Hey, while you're here, do you want me to play? I've actually written some instrumental music. Do you want to hear some of these things? See if this is in the right direction for what you're looking for." And I played her a couple of pieces, and one of them, she just said, "That piece, exactly as it stands, is the main theme for the movie." And so I'd kind of written the movie's main piece without even knowing I was going to do a film, or even ever work on a film, and again I found that's often the way. It's kind of, again, I'm kind of going a bit mystical here. Like sometimes ideas, you don't know where they come from. They're floating around. I don't know where a tune comes from. Sometimes they literally do just pop into your head, and sometimes you can have half an hour where every idea that you have, you're sitting at the piano, you're sitting at your guitar, and everything that you play is the basis of a song or a piece of music. And other times you can go 6 months without, maybe writing anything. And I don't know why that happens. I'm just happy to accept it when it does.
Like very recently, actually, you were working on a commemorative show of Nick Drake's. How did it happen? And is there any song that you particularly like from him?
Yeah, there's a lot of great. You wrote a lot of great songs. That happened. Well, this year would have been Nick Drake's 70th birthday, where he's still alive. So there were a number of projects, I think, to sort of celebrate his life and work. And there's a lovely theatre in Bristol called St George's, and the promoter there asked me if I could. He just approached me and said, could I put together an evening of Nick Drake's music? I could do whatever I wanted, use whatever musicians I wanted. There was a string quartet available if I wanted that. So it's like, okay, sounds good. It will be a challenge. And so I knew I wanted, I didn't want to do one of those things, because sometimes when you do a show like that, I didn't want to have a band and then have a different singer come on and sing each song. You have that kind of revolving door thing. I mean, that kind of works sometimes, but I wanted it to have a bit more of an identity. So I asked 3 singers to take part. So because the opposite to the revolving door thing is you have one singer and then it becomes about that person and that person's interpretation of Nick Drake. And I didn't really want that either. So I thought a way of bridging that was to have 3 singers, so there was enough of an identity to the sound, but there was also a bit of variation, so it wasn't one singer taking all the weight. So I asked Aldous Harding, the singer from New Zealand that I work with, H. Hawkline, a Welsh singer, and Nadine Khoury, who's a Lebanese singer. And they've all got quite different voices, but they all interpreted the songs beautifully, sang them amazingly. And the music that I really wanted to do, my favorite Nick Drake album by a long way is Pink Moon. And because obviously that's so stripped back as a record, for me it was an ideal one to think about. There was no, in a way, there was no blueprint for how you thought the song should sound. They were really open to me, and it was really nice to arrange it for strings or a band, and it was a good project. And I think that there's a possibility we might tour with that. We've been asked to do some more shows, so maybe that's not over yet. Maybe that's ongoing.
Tonight you will be here with a band performing your newest album, actually, the Bird Dog Dante. And Harding also is, you just mentioned her singing there. So can you tell us a bit more about the record? Because it's been quite a time you actually released albums. So
it has, yeah. Yeah, I'm not very fast at putting out records. But in my defense, that's because I get asked to do a lot of interesting projects, and it's just very hard to turn them down. But I had an idea for a little while now that I wanted to do a record that was initially, well, it started off, it was going to be very much 50-50. It was going to be half songs and half instrumental, and it was really going to be, I mean, I still think of things as a vinyl record. Well, to me, an album is a vinyl record, so you have 2 sides. So one side was going to be songs, one side was going to be instrumental. But as the writing developed, I realized it was leaning a bit more towards songs. And then when I started sequencing the record, it didn't quite work as I thought it was going to in my mind. And I have learned not to force things into a place they don't want to be. So I thought, okay, let's just mix it up a little bit. So I was pretty happy with the way the record turned out. I was just unhappy that it took me so long to actually get round to making it.
One of the singers on the album is also PJ Harvey, but you've got many other collaborators in there. Also, your daughter and actually your wife were working on the album as an artist.
It's a family business.
Yeah, it seems so. That's very nice, actually. But your wife also did a layout for PJ Harvey's albums, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah. Michelle, my wife, has art directed the Hope 6 Demolition Project and Let England Shake. She did the cover for that too. and I think she did the merchandising for the record before that, for our last collaboration, A Woman, a Man Walked By. So yeah, it was really nice to have. Yes, I mean, it's a luxury to be able to have really good artists to draw, in the family, and it was particularly great to be able to ask my daughter Anna to do the cover. I mean, she's actually studying to become a historian, and she does art in her spare time, but she's already quite in demand as a designer for record covers for a number of bands and a couple of small independent labels now. So it's yeah, it's just I mean, I like to, it's great working with people that you have any kind of relationship with. If it happens to be your own family, it can be, I mean, obviously then it's hard if somebody does something you don't like it. But luckily I didn't have that problem this time. But obviously me and Michelle sometimes disagree over how things, and she can't stand working for me. She thinks I'm the worst person to work with.
It is said that the voice of Harding, that it was recorded during some break at Jules Holland's show. Is it true, or it's just a pure PR?
No, I'm not clever enough to think that up as a piece of PR. It really was true. I knew that I wanted Hannah to sing on that track, that song, because I knew she was the only person I knew that could get that high and sing it in that way. And but she was really busy, and I was really busy, and we didn't find a time to do it. And then she'd asked me, it was the first show she'd done on British TV, and she was a little bit nervous, so she asked if I'd come and play piano on. I think it was there as moral support, because she had a perfectly good piano player who could have played it fine, but I was happy to do it. And while we were waiting, there's always TV things that they're kind of funny things doing TV shows, because there's a lot of hanging around, which is very boring. Then 5 minutes when it's really nerve-wracking, you have to play something live with no warm-up, and it's not my ideal way of performing. But anyway, we were in the dressing room killing time, and I just said, hey, why don't we record the vocals now? And Hannah said, well, we haven't got any equipment. So I said, well, I've got a phone, you've got a phone, and we've got one pair of earbuds. So I'll play the song on my phone, you listen to it and sing, and we'll record it onto your phone. And literally that was how we did it. And then the magic of technology, I bounced it into the track, and it sounds fantastic. That was not an advert for iPhone, by the way.
You released the album at the label through a jockey. How important is the role of the label for you?
Well, I think they're a fantastic label, and I really like Bettina, who runs the label. They've been really supportive of me right from the beginning, from the first record, How Animals Move, which was maybe 15 years ago or something now, I suppose. And I think that loyalty, I put quite a high stock in loyalty. So if you've got a good relationship with a label, there might be bigger labels that might be interested in doing stuff, but I really like to work with people that I know and whose artistic judgment I respect and trust. So I'm very happy to be involved with Thrill. Yeah, it's nice. I always feel proud to say, yeah, Thrill Jockey put my records out, because I think it's a really cool label.
You're gonna have a show tonight, so what will the audience hear? Only the new material, or some of the old stuff as well?
It will be a mixture. I mean, obviously I'm concentrating on the new record, but there's certainly going to be there's something from all the albums, I think, as part of the set tonight.
We've got like 1 or 2 minutes left, so if there are any questions, you can also ask, I think. So are there any questions? Seems like everything was said. Oh.
Is he playing? Oh, right. Okay, I didn't know that. I haven't, obviously didn't read the program properly. Yeah, I've worked with Matt on I mean, we've been friends for a while. We met through How and Giant Sand, and I've drummed on a few tracks for him in the past. And well, I'll try. Do you know what time he's playing? That's probably the same time as us, isn't it? Check it out, let me know. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll have a look at the program too. I didn't see his name, but yeah, I will definitely look him up.
So do you follow him also with his new stuff?
I haven't heard. Oh, I don't know. Has he done a very new record? The last one I heard was the one with the red crisscrossy cover. I'm not very good with titles. It probably came out 3 years ago. Has there been a new one since then? Right. In that case, I'm not following closely enough. Right. Is how far away is the stage? Okay, right. Okay, right. So I'm going to be straight off stage over to Matt Ward's. Great. Looking forward to it. Thanks. Oh, that's great. Usually the questions, it's the audience learns something from the person on the stage. This time it was the other way around. That's nice.
So it seems like you will not only see John Parish playing, but also running around. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, pleasure.
Thank you for listening us, and enjoy the festival, of course.
Thank you.